just because we enjoy eating that stuff. This is a company that's doing it a little differently, which is cell-based meat. So most of the alternative meats you look now, Impossible, Beyond, etc., have it's a plant-based product, and so they're genetically understanding a construct of plants to put together a formula to have meat replicated. These Memphis Meats is actually a world leader in what's called cell-based meat, which is a little different, right? They're actually taking meat from the cellular level and growing it in a lab. So just one of the ways, all of these companies are aiming towards preserving the environment by providing a less taxing way. I mean, meat is really taxing on the environment, both from water and energy and animals and antibiotics, and all of that goes into it. So this is an alternative way of getting plant or alternative-based meats.
So I love the Beyond Meats and the stuff they've created. It's really amazing, and it tastes really good. Do you find that, and I'm reading this, and their goal at your company, memphismeats.com, is to feed 10 billion people by 2050. And I've seen, I think it was Bill Gates or a couple other people, Richard Branson maybe, they were really looking at this model of making meat and making it so we don't have to slaughter animals, because it's very taxing. Where's the future of this? Is it, the vegan vegetarian side? Obviously it's growing. And then do you find this will really be a substitute in the next 20, 30 years?
Yeah, I mean, it's, when you talk about vegetarian, vegan, it's very controversial. People who love meat or get very defensive, and the vegans some of them are crazy. So it goes both ways, right? I think if you take a step back and look at diet from a medical standpoint, so there's a medical standpoint, an ethical standpoint, and then just a feasibility standpoint. From a medical standpoint, there's been conflicting data, but I think most physicians would agree that a plant-based diet, whether you can do it or not is a different argument, but just from a pure fuel into the body perspective is a cleaner and healthier diet. I mean, you can reverse atherosclerotic disease, you can reverse, coronary disease, strokes, all of that kind of stuff, hypertension, and that's been shown over and over again. There's a large study called the China study, was a study conducted out of Cornell, 2 PhDs in nutrition, spent, I think, 30 or 40 years in multiple locations in China with various types of diet, and they looked at oncologic cancer risk and lots of other things. So I would implore people who have interest in this, if you can get past the sensationalism of, I'm going to defend my meat eating or I'm going to defend my veganism, it's got true science behind it and shows that a plant-based diet is a lot healthier. So that from the medical, from the human side of it, it's definitely better for your body. From the environmental perspective, just the amount of energy, whether it's water, feed, antibiotics, all of that goes into one animal, and then what that one animal can feed versus if you took that energy and put it into a crop and how much you can produce and how many people that can feed, that's an argument also for the environmentalists out there. Whether or not the alternative meat structure, the creation of this alternative meat structure is to try to move people away from an environmental perspective from eating meat, not because of the ethical reason of eating meat, it's because of the environmental reason. So any one of these potential alternatives gives you that outcome. And that's what the genesis of the focus of these companies are. It's not to get into the ethical /health / all these other things. Now, those are side byproducts of doing it, but that's not where the focus is.
I love it. And this thing, I don't know if you watched the Jetsons when we were kids. Did you ever watch that TV show?
Yeah.
So you walk over to your fridge, you push a button, and the food pops out. And I look at this in the future that, what was on our TV 20, 30 years ago, Star Trek, and, we had the iPods, we had the iPads, we had the eyes, back 20 years ago, 30 years ago, conceptually with Star Trek. I love that we're creating tech that's making it simple, but also making it better for this world.
That's what this is.
Yeah, I love it. So tell me, why are you so passionate about adding value to this world? Because obviously you're an investor, and you're a physician. So do you get really the purpose from, healing people with your physician side, and then you're like, hey, you know what? I can really do so much more by creating businesses around the world that, shift the world. Like, where did it come? Is it from a father, a mentor, somebody in your life?
It's interesting. I think a lot of it has come from frustration. So going through the things that I've gone through, not from I don't mean from a perspective of hardship. I mean, start training and going through training and seeing people who are sick and saying, okay, I'm going to try to help them, and then getting frustrated that the tools don't exist, or that the way the world or the way the structure is set up is against us making a difference when we can make a difference. And so that the trip or the path that I've taken through each of those steps that I've gone to and has gone and then moved into these other disciplines, so from medicine into investing, into tech, into all of these things, it was always a springboard of seeing something that was broken and saying, I can try to fix it, hopefully better, but at least let me try to fix it. And when you talk about a mentor, and that it wasn't specifically a mentor for me, but I have two small kids, and I try to impart that on them. And I've sort of learned, trying to focus them and having them, is that there is a component of it that's innate, that there are those who are inquisitive and have curiosity, and then there's those who don't, and that's okay. But there is an element of imparting that and teaching that. And I've sat down and tried to look back. Where did that influence come from? And to an extent, it was my parents. I mean, they were very ingenuitive, and they were doing things like that. But a lot of it is just from exposure to experiences that frustrated me, and then having a personality that said, I'm going to try to fix it.
I love that. That's where I got into education too. Okay, a few more minutes if that's good. Love what you're doing with FSM. How'd you get into basketball? I love basketball. I play basketball. I whoop Jake at basketball. I won't replay him because he's tough, and I beat him on his bad day. But I love the sport at this point. I used to be an MMA fighter and pro wrestler, but basketball is so much fun. Did you play when you were a kid? How'd you get into representing athletes and being a part of it?
Yeah, there's actually a funny story in that. I have very little sports knowledge. I grew up in Canada, and I grew up at a time when there weren't a lot of sports. Hockey had gone on a strike, and basically we had the CFL. So I don't have a deep sports background, and I think I was studying a lot, trying to become a doctor instead of watching sports. But when I got to the U.S., when I moved here, sports is obviously a bigger portion of the culture. And through some personal relationships and friends, got to know some basketball players, and have a friend who had started a sports agency. And as we were talking about it, and I was telling him about our thesis at Builders of taking tech to revolutionise that, the sports representation business is probably broken to a certain extent as well, and that these players, which are the pinnacle athletes, they're at the top of their game, they do what they do it really well. But the rest, you hear about these folks who go bankrupt because they didn't know how to manage their money, or they had someone steal their money, whatever it may be. That there was an opportunity to use both tech and our understanding of investment to help these players on the portion that they weren't doing well, which was managing their money or managing their contracts, and opening them to, exposing them to opportunities that we had. So one of the fundamentals at FSM is, we have access to these investments. We have access to different types of deals and different things that we can help them use their what we call FSM legacy, use their legacy to impart both economic gain, philanthropic gain, and then a legacy for them and their families through all the efforts that they want to pursue. So we build an infrastructure for them to do that on those three fronts. And that's resonated with, you'd be surprised, how many players we talk to who they go, you know what, if I knew how to do philanthropy, I would do it. I want to help the community I came from. I want to help people with certain illnesses or certain conditions or whatever. I just don't know how to do it. And so we set up the infrastructure for them to be successful, both for themselves financially, but also for their other endeavors that they have interests in, whether it's foundations, philanthropy, investments, all of these other things that go into being a well-rounded athlete.
So I saw a lot of athletes when I was a pro athlete they lost everything. Like they were broke, like you said. And I think there was a number I heard at one point. I don't know if you have it, but there's a number at one point. There was like 97% of NFL players are broke or divorced within 3 years of finishing the sport. And NBA was less because they got paid more, and their contracts, I think, were guaranteed, and they had less athletes on a team, and they got paid more. What's your thought on that? And do you think that's going to shift in the future at all, where that market goes? Definitely maybe with COVID and what's going on.
No, that's exactly it. I don't know the specific stat for the NFL. For the NBA, it is a little lower for the reasons that you said, guaranteed contracts, larger contracts, etc. But that is the origin story, the genesis of FSM, was that frustration, seeing these really high-performing athletes get taken because they couldn't manage that other part. I mean, you hear lots of stories of folks, of athletes who are venture capitalists and doing really well. I mean, that's not to say that that's everybody. There's lots of folks who are very plugged in, who have the resources to do that kind of stuff. But there is a large segment that's just not their focus. And so that's what this was about, was establishing a platform that allowed these folks to have the infrastructure to succeed and not get trapped in that story that we hear all the time. And it's been doing really well, and it's working really well for the folks that are on our roster.
How many athletes do you guys represent now?
7.
That's awesome. What for legacy? I think that's huge. I'd love to know yours. Like, I always ask people too, like, what do you want on your tombstone? Like, what at the end of the day, what is your legacy? Obviously, you help a lot of people, and that's why we built this podcast. I did a TED Talk a couple of years ago, and I actually got to name my TED Talk, and then coming out with the Significant Breed Success book, because I find in America a lot of people are taught, get good grades, go to a great college. Obviously, you did that. Go make a lot of money. Obviously, you probably do that too. But I find that every single one of your projects or every single one of your companies, your life is built around a bigger purpose. And it's really to solve a problem and serve people. What is your legacy? Have you defined that, or what you want on your tombstone one day, which hopefully won't come for a very long time?
Yeah. I would say that when I was early on in college and answering that question for myself, I sort of sat down and in my head made a little manifesto of how did I want to spend my life kind of thing. And so I would say I've tried to split, or I am trying to split my life into 3 segments. The first segment was doing what I'm doing now, which was developing, working, fixing, helping people, doing all the things that I do, both on a personal level to improve myself and satisfy that internal curiosity I have. I like to do those kinds of things. I like to build companies. I like to invest in companies, do things that I enjoy to try to make a difference and make things better. I think about 3 or 4 years ago, like I said, I have an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old, that sort of driving North Star change to show those kids to do the same thing, to be good humans, to do better for the world and do those kinds of things. And lots of ways to do that, whether it's make money and donate it, whether it's to help with philanthropy, whether it's to volunteer. And so we try to expose them to all of those things and do all of those things. So that, I think the second sort of portion here, while they're young, is to provide a North Star for them to understand, be good humans and do that. And then I think the latter half, which I don't think I'm at, but I'd like to get to, is become that mentor for others. And, I do mentor now and help people, but I always found it a little arrogant that I felt that I could be a mentor to some of these folks when, I haven't finished doing what I want to do or what I'm supposed to do. So, but I think as I get a little older and some of these things mature, and have been around the block enough times with some of these things, I think that's where I'd like to dedicate most of my time, is to mentorship, to help others do kind of what I've wanted to do or what I've done once it's beyond just my kids.
I love that. I'd love to ask one more question, because you brought up your kids, and I find that so many people in your position take a lot of time in the work world, and you talk a lot about your kids right now, about how you want to make amazing humans. What are a couple of the tips out there for execs, CEOs, entrepreneurs that are maybe coming up. So it's this mentorship side of it that you just talked about. What are a couple of pieces of advice on how to raise good children, and or maybe, you're